I'm going to be sharing a little bit about something we've been talking about here in recent weeks. Scott had a couple messages about the Sabbath a few weeks ago, and there's just a few things as I listened to what he said and considered those passages that he shared, and just a few things that stood out to me, and I wanted to share with you kind of how it struck me and how it convicted me in some ways, and it also, I think, can help us, or it should be in our minds as we think about our church moving forward. So not only the personal side of it, but then expanding that onto us as a body of believers. And so I want to just kind of share that with you, and I'll start with just some things personally that made me think about and consider in my life. So I think the first thing is maybe how I've perceived Sundays in the past and what they were about and how I went about doing Sundays, I guess, planning them or lack of planning them, and then maybe the reality of what was actually happening and what I actually should have been doing. But Sundays, I have always taken the rest side of it very, very seriously. Probably too seriously, really. I think of Sunday afternoon naps being almost as that was one of the 10 Commandments, I think. It was actually, it said, "Thou shalt honor the Sabbath and take a nap." That's in my mind, that was about where it was. And I think my attitude towards me personally being able to rest oftentimes had overshadowed the purpose of Sundays. And anyways, I think looking at what Jesus had talked to the Pharisees about, he said, well, if your sheep falls in the well, you're going to pull it out, aren't you? Well, I'm sure if I would have had a sheep or a donkey that fell in the well, I would have pulled it out, but that's a metaphor, of course. And I think in my life, there's some sheep that were falling in the well that I probably wasn't even aware of, and so I wasn't even thinking about pulling them out. And what does that mean? Well, I can tell you a couple of examples. So one would be, Sundays after church. First of all, I was tired because it was a long week and I didn't get the rest I probably should have on Saturday night. And I hadn't been preparing myself for Sunday. So if I was able to pay attention for the whole service and for the sermon, well, by the time church is over, I'm just ready to go home. Visiting is, well, I guess we can visit for a few minutes, but I want to get home. I'm hungry, I'm tired. And so we get home and eat as fast as I can so I can get my nap as fast as I can. Because I'm tired and it's Sunday and we need to rest. Well, what else is going on there? Well, that probably, some of that worked okay when I didn't have a wife and children. But, so now my rest has come before my wife's rest. And the fact that Sundays are not just for rest, but also for worship. So here's me hurrying up and eating and then leaving the table to go take a nap while, again, my wife is feeding our kids by herself while I'm not there. I'm resting. She's not resting. What about her Sabbath? So there's definitely a selfish attitude that I can see in myself as I look at that, how that all plays out. The sad thing for me as I reflect on it, it didn't really stop there for me. I think Jesus also then, he goes and he heals the crippled man. And he says, is it right? Should we do good on the Sabbath? Is it okay to do good? Well, doing good, the Pharisees were looking at him and saying, well, he's doing work. He's healing somebody. That's work. He's supposed to be resting. And for me, I think there's part of me that was having the same kind of an attitude. Like, the rest of the day on Sunday is for me to rest, and I shouldn't have to go do anything. And we don't have to go anywhere. We can just rest and be lazy. And, it was hard for me sometimes to get real motivated to want to go do even good things, like, going to the Good Sam Center. I mean, that's embarrassing for me to say that. It's not some place I wanted to go because it's Sunday, and I've been working hard all week, and I just want to stay home. And it was the wrong attitude. It was a selfish attitude that didn't. I was a Pharisee in that, and so that's a hard thing for me to really admit. But I think it's true, and so my whole perception of what Sundays are supposed to be about, as it pertains to rest, I really feel like I was placing that rest thing for me as an idol, as the most important thing on Sundays, and I think Scott's messages and really Jesus' words make it pretty clear that's not the point. Isn't rest. That's part of it, but that is not the main part. That's not the only part. So that's the first thing. And so as I think about it, so what am I going to do different? What's the corrective action I need to take in order to change what I see as a wrong application of Sundays? And the first one is just prepare for it. That means trying to get a better night's sleep before, and not being just so tired that I can't stay awake during the service, or I can't mentally engage in it, and then not being so tired that I feel like I have to take this nap on my own schedule and not consider other people's needs and rest and other good things that I can or should be doing on Sundays, and most specifically my wife's, and considering her need for a break as well. So just recognizing that the rest is not just for me, but it's for others as well. And the other part of it is planning, trying to make time for the Lord and for family outside of just Sundays. So, if rest is such an important thing in my mind that is crowding out these other things, it's crowding out ministry or worship opportunities, and it's crowding out time spent with my family or serving them, well, I still should rest at some point, but I also need to make time to do all those other things. And if it can't all fit into Sunday, then I need to make some time other times of the week to do those things. So those are just a few things that have come up, that I guess as we were going through those lessons on the Sabbath that were striking me, and I was thinking more deeply about the other part of it that I think we need to, and this is maybe where it applies to us as a church, as a body as well, and that's ministry and worship, and how the Sabbath how those things all come together. One statement that, or I guess a definition that Scott had mentioned and I thought is relevant as we talk about this is ministry is what we give others. It's how we serve others in the name of Christ. Worship is what we give God. So as we think about that, ministry is how we serve other people in the name of Christ, but worship is what we are giving to God directly. Sometimes ministry is an act of worship, sometimes it's not. But there's just a little bit of a distinction there. I guess here would be an example. I could go and play those songs that Emily played this morning, those hymns, but it would really be an act of ministry because I'm not as good as Emily at playing, so I'd really have to be focused on the notes and not on the words to the hymn. Whereas Emily is talented enough that she can be worshiping God, actively worshiping God while she's playing. So for her, playing the piano is worship, and for me, we ministry. So does that make sense? Does that I think that's the best I can come up with. For some people, that they are just, God has gifted them or given them certain things that it is an act of worship for them to do that thing, and it could be ministry as well, but for others, it is strictly an act of ministry, primarily. So, anyways, I thought that was an interesting and important distinction to make. So, going back to the Pharisees, they had their whole list of all the specifics of how they were supposed to honor the Sabbath. And I think we can give them a little bit of credit that at some point early on, those were meant, like they instituted those rules because they were trying to figure out how to honor the Sabbath. And they were thinking, these are the ways that we can do that, the specific ways. And of course, it went off the tracks at some point, to the point where it became what it was. But at one point, they did have good intentions. And maybe they even still, some of them at least, still had some good intentions at that time when Jesus was there, but there's definitely those that it was, a total train wreck of what the Sabbath was supposed to be about. They got to the point where the Sabbath had become more of a burden to the Jewish people than the other 6 days a week when they were working. So that's a pretty good indicator that it wasn't the way it was supposed to be. This resting had become more work than working was. So, Scott had shared some of those crazy ideas, like you had to be within so many feet of a chair, otherwise it was called traveling, or you could only do certain things. So the preparations even to get to Sunday were probably just really complicated and difficult. So it's not hard for us to look at that and say, wow, those Pharisees they were way off track. And you're right, they were. It was not a day of worship, it was a day of work, really, for them. And I think we're tempted to say, well, that's easy to see, but that would never happen to us. We would ever put ourselves in that kind of situation. And I would like to think we would never get that far, but I think there's some tangents and some parallels to that maybe we would find ourselves with the wrong approach, the wrong mindset when it comes to worship, when it comes to Sundays. And the scripture that came to mind for me was the story of Mary and Martha. And that's found in Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. And I'd like to read them and kind of walk through them a little bit. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. While they were traveling, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who also sat at the Lord's feet and was listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, and she came up and sat and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? So tell her to give me a hand." The Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has made the right choice, and it will not be taken away from her." So, as I thought about what's not written here, trying to fill in the gaps to kind of paint this picture and understand what was happening, I can kind of imagine Martha seeing Jesus coming, and I'm not sure, if she'd been kind of following Jesus from a distance before, like she knew who he was and what he was about, and she welcomed him in. I just wonder if she expected the 12:30 fishermen and like these guys that have been all traveling. Did she expect them to come in too? Was she just inviting Jesus in, or did she know that all these other guys were coming? Has she talked to Mary about this? Did she say, "Hey Mary, let's invite those guys to come in and we'll feed them and put them up for the night," or did she just kind of expect Mary to follow along? I imagine Martha being the older, responsible daughter who, runs the household, and I kind of imagine Mary being the youngest that is always kind of like skirting her duties whenever she can. I don't know, maybe that's all backwards, we don't really know, but that's kind of the picture in my mind that is being painted. And maybe Martha just invited these guys in and just expected Mary to pitch in and help out. We don't really know all those things, but at any rate, Martha welcomed him in. She welcomed Jesus in, and she had good intentions. She wanted to serve. She wanted Jesus to come to her home, and I think we are the same way. The Pharisees maybe were the same way at one point. They wanted to honor the Sabbath. They wanted to do the right thing. They had good intentions. They recognized the importance of it. And Martha recognized Jesus. She wanted to serve him. And that's good. She wanted to be a good hostess. I don't know what all would have been involved with inviting all those guys in, but I'm sure that they were dirty and they were hungry. And I don't know what kind of work she needed to get done as they came. But once again, she was trying to serve. She was trying to do the right thing. But it says in verse 40, but Martha was distracted by her many tasks. She had many tasks. The Pharisees had many laws that they were trying to follow. They were very distracted by those. Both Martha and the Pharisees missed Jesus. They both missed what was going on. The Son of God just came into your house. That's pretty amazing. Think about somebody that you admire and respect the most, and if they just came into your house, you might be kind of frazzled because things aren't in order, but would the right response be to kind of ignore them and just go clean the house? Would you regret that later on? Would that kind of miss the point of wanting them to come because you invite them in because you want to spend time with them? The Pharisees had these laws because they wanted to honor the Lord, but the laws became the God instead of God being God. It just doesn't, it's a lot more subtle with Martha because we can only relate to her. We can only relate to, if someone's not pulling their weight, we need to be good hosts and hostesses. We need to get this stuff cleaned up. And we can relate to that. And I think, I'm guilty of this. As I've read this story, there's been times I thought, Jesus, why didn't you tell Mary just to help out? So that, Mary, why didn't you just help out? And then sit with Jesus. It's a little bit of a troubling verse because I think we can see, at least I can see Martha in myself, much more than I can see myself in the Pharisees. But I'm not sure that the difference is as great as what we would initially think. We don't know everything that happened in that instance, but the first interaction that we see between Martha and Jesus, what is it? It's Martha saying, Lord, don't you care? My sister has left me alone to serve. It's kind of about her, isn't it? She's not, we don't hear, the first mention we see of Mary is that she's sitting and listening to Jesus. The first mention we hear of Martha is Martha going to Jesus and asking, don't you care about me? So there's a difference there, isn't there? Martha's distractions had resulted in her missing the part about listening and the part about being with Jesus. It had become about her and her workload and her responsibilities more so than about who was in her house and why. Why was he there? What had started as a ministry, Martha inviting Jesus and his followers in, had become not a ministry anymore. It was a chore and not ministry and definitely not worship. Now, this isn't the Sabbath. We don't know what day of the week it was. This isn't the Sunday service, so I don't, I guess, be careful. We have to be careful about how far we read into it. But the point is that Martha's distractions took away what the whole thing was supposed to be about. And Jesus acknowledges that. He says, there are many things on your mind. You have many worries and many concerns. You're upset about many things. And he doesn't say that those things were wrong or not important or that sinful or any of those things. He says, but one thing is necessary. Well, he doesn't spell out what that one thing is, but he says Mary made the right choice. Mary sat at the feet of Jesus and listened. Mary was with Jesus. She didn't let the distractions pull her away and create something that was a negative thing. That she was there listening to him. So I think the lesson that I can see here is that the point of worship must be placed above ministry. Mary understood that the Son of God was in their home, and being with him at that time was more important and should have taken priority over the many things that Martha was concerned about. Martha was trying to minister, she was trying to serve, but it came ahead of the worship part of it, and the result was contempt. She wanted Jesus to tell that lazy Martha to get off her rear end and come up and help me do things, and that's not right. That's not only is it the wrong thing, it's going down a sinful path to start thinking about her sister, who was worshiping, who was doing the right thing, as doing the wrong thing. So it's not that much different than the Pharisees. As they heard Jesus say, is it right to do good on the Sabbath, heal a man, and then they go off to plot his destruction. They completely missed what Jesus was there for. They completely missed the whole idea of the Sabbath, to the point where they hated him, and we all know how the rest of the story plays out. So if we don't place worship as the first priority ahead of ministry, we risk the same thing. We risk our ministry turning into something that's not honoring to God, and starts to breed, or is a breeding ground for contempt. Maybe not for other people necessarily. Maybe it's just for the job at hand. And I can realize that I've been Martha more than once. I always have good intentions, but it's so easy to be busy and distracted with ministry that worship has been lacking. And I can tell you there's been Sunday mornings where I'm more distracted by the light bulb that's burned out, and the battery in the clock that needs to be replaced, and the feedback in the sound system, or that one song that we push the button on and it's a little too fast, or it's got that weird awkward pause, and I feel some kind of responsibility to fix all those things, and all those things then distract me from worshiping. As a result, some of those ministry things become things that I don't like doing anymore, because I missed the whole point of doing it. I've missed the worship part. It's not that I have contempt for anybody in this church. I hope you don't get that conclusion. That's not it. I don't have contempt for our church in general. But I can see how easy it is, how slippery that slope is, when the things that we're doing as individuals in the name of ministry become something that's completely separate from worship and placed above worship, or that it comes to the place of worship. So, now what? What do we do with all that? We can't just stop doing everything. But I think here's what we need to think about as a church, and think about it as individuals first, and then think about it as a church, as a body of believers. And I guess, to take a step back, part of maybe the overwhelmingness, maybe part of Martha's overwhelmingness, is maybe she had volunteered to do all that stuff herself, and then she got overcome by all there was to do. And I'm pretty guilty of not being able to say no to things, or just doing whatever without really thinking about, do I have the capacity to actually do this and do it with the right heart. But I think, again, going back to it as a church and as individuals, is if Jesus was talking to us and he said there are You're worried and upset about many things, but one thing is necessary. So he knew about all the things that were going on. Mary probably did too. Mary probably knew that the disciples had dirty feet that needed to get washed, or, they were hungry. I doubt that Mary was completely oblivious to all the things that Martha was concerned about. So, if we're Martha, what are the things that we're worried and upset about or concerned about that are distracting us from being with Jesus, from sitting at His feet? I'm talking about on a Sunday morning. Are there things in your life that keep you from being able to worship? Are there things when you walk into the church that keep you from being able to worship? Or, here's the other side of that. What do you need to be able to worship? We didn't have bulletins this morning. And to begin with, I was going to have Scott do it, and then I thought, you know what? Let's not do it this week. Can we worship without a bulletin? It's a little uncomfortable, and granted, there's probably some confusion. Where are the bulletins? They're supposed to be here. So I apologize for the confusion, but it also was kind of to make a point. Now, I can tell you that Scott has told myself and the board many times he's willing to do those things. It's not like a burden for him. Like he knows that that's something that he's able to do and is willing to do and all that. Let's say, we'll just use the bulletin as an example. If that was something that was just a burden for somebody to do, and it wasn't something that somebody was willing or able to do with the right worship and ministry mindset, is that something we can do without? Could we worship without that? I guess what I'm getting at is, how much ministry do we expect other people to perform in order for us to worship? It's maybe a kind of a complicated thing. If we met at the park and there was no piano and there was no hymnals and there was no, it wasn't even if the sermon wasn't even prepared, and we all just showed up and we just shared, like we just sang some favorite hymns. Actually, that's a good example. We don't plan ahead our favorite hymns, but it's a joy when we sing those because we connect with those. Nobody prepared those. We know them and we do them together. We can do them a cappella without a piano, and we can truly worship doing that. When I think about things like that, and then I start to ask, how much do we do as a church that is those extra things that Martha was concerned about, when only one thing is necessary? There are endless ministry opportunities in our community and around the world. And I think we just, as a church, we need to remember that there will always be ministry opportunities, but one thing is necessary. We need to focus on that one thing. As the demographics of our church have changed, and the size of our church has changed, and we've had these conversations about where do we go from here. I think this account of Mary and Martha has just become so relevant to me that we remember the one thing that's necessary and we build from there, rather than thinking about all the things that are worrisome and upset us. And it's not that they're not necessarily bad things. We have good intentions when we attempt those things and we try them, but we just need to come back to that. What is the one thing that is necessary, and that's worship. And so that's my challenge, I guess, for myself, to be able to set aside those things that worry and upset me, or have the right heart and mindset about those things, but also for us as a church, as we're gonna, we talked about what changes we need to make to be able to minister effectively, and how do we create Marys? How do we cultivate Marys and avoid making Marthas? How do we do that? And I don't have any great specific answers for you today, but I just, again, I ask you to maybe read this passage this week and in the coming weeks, and just really think about what is that one thing, and how do we focus on that first and foremost, and then build from there. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you this morning for your word. Lord, it is powerful, it is convicting, Lord, it is encouraging, and it is true. God, I confess that there have been many times where I have had the mindset and the attitude of Martha, and I've been distracted by many things that have pulled me away from you, and pulled me away from worshiping you. Lord, so often they are with good intentions. It is wanting to serve others and also serve you, but Lord, when those things come ahead of just the relationship I have directly with you, God, I resemble a Pharisee much more than I resemble a disciple, or than I resemble Mary. And that I'm so busy trying to keep up with those details and those other things that I just miss the whole point. Lord, I think about that as we talk about Sundays and how I missed the point about worship. I missed the point about resting the right way and considering others and doing good on Sundays, on the Sabbath. Lord, I pray that you would just give me the right heart for our church, for my family, for this day of rest. Lord, I pray for our church that we would just constantly be evaluating what we're doing, so that we're doing things for the right reasons, in the right order. Lord, that we would be a church of Marys. And Lord, I know that there are things that need to be done. I don't want to make light of those things that many people sacrifice time and effort to do. Lord, I just ask that we will be doing them for the right reasons, in the right way, with the right heart. Lord, that worship would be our primary focus, that we would sit at your feet and listen to you first. That from there, then we can serve. Then we have the strength and the perspective and the right heart to serve. Lord, keep us from doing things in the wrong order. Lord, keep us from ending up with contempt either for other people or for the job at hand. Keep us from those things becoming distractions from truly worshiping you. God, it's not easy. There are complicated things that we have to figure out. I just ask you to give us guidance in that. Thank you again, Lord, for this church. Thank you for the foundation we have in your word, that this book is what guides us, Lord. Your word is what guides us. And just ask that we would always keep that in its proper place, and that we would be following your word and not following just whatever we think or feel or whatever we used to do, Lord, that we would always be evaluating what we're doing by your word. Lord, I pray you be with us this week. I pray that these things would be on our hearts and our minds, and that as we chart a course for this church, that